US officials are expected to depart for a second round of peace talks in Pakistan tomorrow. And Donald Trump has warned another extension on the ceasefire is highly unlikely if a deal is not reached. Live to Reid Butler in Los Angeles. Reid, what is the latest from Iran?
Well, Jane, Iran's foreign ministry is saying, publicly at least, that no decision has been made on whether this second round of negotiations will go ahead. But the United States does seem confident that the talks will proceed, and they are sending the US Vice President J.D. Vance. Trump posted a little earlier this morning, if a deal happens under Trump, it will guarantee peace, security and safety, not only for Israel and the Middle East, but for Europe, America and everywhere else. But the question is, of course, what will that deal look like? Both sides appear to be at pretty opposite ends of the spectrum, especially when it comes to uranium enrichment and the Strait of Hormuz. We also know that Iran's president today, he has been saying that continuing war benefits no one, but there was deep historical mistrust looming over any upcoming talks. So yes, mixed messages there. Compounding all of this is the United States boarding and seizing an Iranian cargo ship accused of defying America's blockade of Iran's ports in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has vowed revenge, so these talks could be sunk before they've even happened. And Jane, just in the past few minutes, Donald Trump has posted on his Truth Social saying that he believes America is winning this war by a lot and everything is going very well.
OK, Reid Butler, thank you.
Welcome back to the show. Iran is vowing to retaliate this morning after the US attacked and seized an Iranian cargo ship.
The escalation casting doubt over peace talks in Pakistan. To discuss, we are joined this morning by former US Marines intelligence officer Hal Kempfer, live in LA. Hal, thanks for your time again. So the US seized that cargo ship about 24 hours ago. There's been no response yet from Iran. What can we expect?
Well, sir, it's to be seen what they will do. They'll probably do something like they did last Saturday, where they basically took fast speedboats, gunboats in the Persian Gulf, in the Strait, and they fired on some ships. Now, right now, there's not many ships going through. In fact, I don't think there's hardly any ships going through the Strait of Hormuz, so I'm not sure what they would fire on. But, you know, in some ways, you would say what was done with this tanker, the Tuska, which the U.S., by the way, had been talking to for 6 hours before they actually opened fire. Very carefully aimed armed rounds put into the engine compartment to disable, not sink the ship. This was in response to what the Iranians had done on Saturday. So I'm not sure what they'll do. They could always fire drones, ballistic missiles, speedboats, whatever. But I think U.S. forces and all the Gulf allies are also ready for whatever they're going to do.
So the wider ramifications, let's go to that. Donald Trump, amongst other things, is now saying it's highly unlikely he will extend the ceasefire. Does he?
I don't know. You know, Donald Trump has a way of throwing these things out there, and it's all part of a larger negotiation. So I think what he's basically telling the Iranians, because they came out and said, oh, no, because of this, we're not going to send a delegation to Islamabad. We're not going to meet with the U.S. President Trump tends to go towards, you know, very strong rhetoric to make it very clear what the consequences are. This is one of those cases. And he's making it very clear that if they think there's going to be an automatic extension on the ceasefire, if they don't negotiate, that may go away. Has Iran violated the ceasefire? Yes. Although technically putting a naval blockade is also considered an act of war. So they would also argue that we have violated the ceasefire as well.
It just keeps dragging on, Hal, and it seems as though there is no resolution. We had peace talks that collapsed in Islamabad. Now they're renewing them. There's peace talks happening between Israel and Lebanon this week. I mean, it just feels endless. There's no solution. There is no resolution. Both sides are being awfully stubborn here, which is obviously the situation. How do we come out of it?
Well, I think what's going to come out of it is we'll see what the negotiations between Lebanon and Israel look like. Although the government of Lebanon and Israel have the same goals. They want to disarm and demilitarize Hezbollah. And that is a historic first. That's a big shift. So I'm very hopeful about what could come out of those negotiations. As far as Iran, the clock's ticking. They've got about 3 more weeks before their economy starts sputtering and stops. And they know that. Now, it's going to hit us hard. I mean, we need the oil. We need the fertilizer. We need the liquefied natural gas. Europe is within about 5 weeks of running out of jet fuel that gets that comes from the Persian Gulf. So, yes, everybody feels the pressure on this, but I think Iran feels it more than anybody else.
So the world needs all of these things, including Australia. And I guess when you're looking at it from a planning point of view, from any other government, any information from the president has been pretty hard to come by. So does he care about that?
President Trump has a very different way of negotiating in public. He says things that obviously put the world on edge. For example, something that would end their civilization, or, bombing large areas, across the board to shut them down. So when he says that, obviously that's not the typical diplomatic rhetoric that one hears, but he does it for effect. And he does it for effect probably mostly somewhat with his base here in the U.S., but also for effect with the Iranians. And he's trying to spur the Iranian public to realize the regime has to go. We would very much like to see what was happening in December and January, except this time we'd hope that you don't see the massacre of the protesters. You see the protesters prevail.
Haven't seen it yet, have we? Unfortunately. Hal, thank you.
Thank you. Well, the US and Iran's ceasefire is as fragile as ever this morning, with President Donald Trump warning it's highly unlikely he will renew the truce, and the economic fallout, of course, continues. For more, we are joined this morning by CNN international business correspondent Richard Quest. Always so good to see you, Richard. So this means even more uncertainty hanging over the Strait of Hormuz. Do you speak Trump? Can you crystal ball this for us, Richard?
No, is the short answer. What I can tell you is that what we are seeing in the market is entirely predictable. Last week we had ceasefire, peace, and oil falls 10%. But the fall is only sustainable or to be maintained if something actually happens, and nothing did. The reality is it all reversed and we go back up 5%. And that's the way it's going to be going forward. Because what the market is doing, it's trading on ambition, hope and desire. But it's that's what it's trading on. But the fundamentals will ultimately speak through, and that's on the basis of what's happening. And to be truthful, barely a handful of ships have left the Straits of Hormuz, despite all the hullabaloo of what was taking place. And that's why you're seeing oil pricing remain elevated.
Up, down, open, closed. I mean, it changes every day, right? You've covered every energy crisis of the past 3 decades.
Yeah.
How much more can the global economy endure?
Yeah, but this is different. This is different.
Tell us why.
This is different for one reason. Well, because the negotiations being done in public. The president is literally scratching himself and speaking. I mean, there's a reason. There's a reason why Emmanuel Macron, in a fit of frustration, said just because you can speak every day doesn't mean you should. He walks out the Oval Office. He says peace might come out this week. I'm feeling good. The market goes. But 3 days later, when nothing's happened, that unwinds, and it's not, it's not taco or anything like that. It's simple. What are the facts telling you that's actually happened, not to what we think has happened?
I mean, it sounds comical, but we shouldn't laugh, right? At what point is a recession inevitable in these circumstances?
We're getting there. Don't worry, we're getting there.
Oh dear.
And we're getting there because you've got 2,000 ships in the Straits. First of all, you've got to get them out. And then those ships have got to get wherever they were going. Yeah. And then some others have got to come back and get in. So that's a 6-week period. So even if everything gets back to normal tomorrow, normal, opens up, it would be weeks and weeks and weeks before some degree of normality would arrive. And even then, there's such damage in the system that manufacturers will keep prices high. They've had to have higher costs. They're going to want to make up some of those costs. No, a good example of the sort of nonsense that we're having to put up with at the moment, and I choose my words carefully, the US Energy Secretary says today that it's unlikely that gas in the United States will go to under $3 a barrel in the next 12 months. The president immediately contradicts him and says he's wrong. Now, how anyone can make sense of policy when you have that head-spinning contradictions, I don't know.
Does he care? Does Donald Trump even care, Richard?
Oh, he cares. Well, he can't be re-elected, so let's get that one out the way. But he cares that the whole thing doesn't come down round his ears.
It kind of is, though, isn't it?
He cares about his public... Not yet. He cares about the public persona. He cares about the strongman image. Now, put it this way. If in November, in the midterms, they lose the House, which is highly likely, and they lose the Senate, and they lose them by some thumping majorities, and he becomes lame duck, I promise you he will care.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's see what happens there.